the screen's ready. It looks like Bitcoin today.
Looks very positive.
Extremely positive. I woke up in a very positive mood today, still.
That's always good.
Good day, Martin.
Hello.
Hello, Martin. How are you?
How you doing?
Nice to see you again.
Interesting times we live in, right?
Sure is. It sure is.
So how is Florida these days, Martin?
Out of the way of everything so far. We haven't gotten really bad cold weather or anything, so a lot of people with their flights been canceled because of bad weather everywhere.
Oh, really?
Okay.
So
Here you go.
I don't know. I don't even want to leave my little island.
I was thinking about something the other day, Martin, before this conversation. And there has been a lot of immigration to the US this last year. Is it 10 or 15 million people or something last years?
At least
I'm
eight.
correct? At least eight, okay. And I was listening to an interview, I think it was yesterday, that some of the reason for the immigration is that they are going to get low-cost slavery or people working for low wages. For example, in the cotton industry. What's your thoughts about that, Martin?
Some companies are doing that, yes, but that's not the reason. What I can tell you is that I actually, the first time I encountered this, I had the mandate from Hong Kong to negotiate with the Australian government. And I met with the, former Prime Minister Paul Keating, and they knew I knew the Australian government. So back in 98, they wanted me to see if I could buy an island, whatever, to leave. And everything I proposed, the answer was no, no, no. And I finally, because it made no sense, I said, I've got a blank check here. I can pay off your national debt. And so I finally said, what is this, racist? I just didn't come up with any other rational explanation. And he said to me, they were a labor government. If they let them in, they would vote conservative and change the politics of the country. And that is what is going on here. Within 3 hours of Biden entering the office, his first executive order was to open the border. This is, and they've been flying them around to hide the amount of numbers of they're coming in. It's now been discovered that they were putting them on planes and bringing them in that way too, so they didn't go across the border. And they've been dumping them off in strategic states in particular. They were dropping a lot in Jacksonville, Florida, and Governor DeSantis discovered that. They were bringing them in like 2:00 in the morning. And so he sent people out there and they picked them up and they sent them off to Massachusetts. And he says, this is outrageous. And it's all about changing the politics. I know I flew out to Austin, Texas, and a lot of people, clients that we have there, they want to move to Florida. I said, what's going on? And they said, people are getting stabbed in malls. They're, what used to be a nice city, they're sleeping all over the streets. He says they got to at least swim to get to you. So this seems to be more of a political attempt. And I mean, look at what they're doing to Trump. And even RFK, they refused to give him security, national security clearance while he's, out there on a campaign trail. I mean, this is basically saying that, I mean, what they've done to Trump is so outrageous. I mean, it's never been done before to anybody running for president.
Yeah.
And I mean, even the nonsense in New York, you got a house and you say, well, I think it's worth $1 million. The bank gives you 500,000. You pay off the loan and say, well, that's fraud because we think it was only worth 800,000. There isn't a company in New York that you can't do that to now.
Right.
It's so they're going out of their way to really completely. They're desperately trying to bankrupt him. The whole issue of the bond, and I think that the Supreme Court there finally realized that this is getting way too political. And I mean, I know, and we have at least a dozen institutional clients all leaving New York, and I can't imagine the banks are not on the phone to them and saying, "What are you people doing?" Yeah. And so I think that's why they lowered the bond from 450 to 175. Because honestly, if they started seizing his property, they sell it for $1. It doesn't matter. He wins his appeal, then the city has to pay what they said the full value was.
Exactly.
It would bankrupt New York.
Yeah.
I mean, these theories are just completely, insane. And, Trump had, 400 or 500 million in cash for his campaign, and they wanted him to put all that up. So he can't run for president.
I have to ask you one more thing about the immigration stuff, Martin, because what I was listening to in this conversation was that when you have lower wages, the inflation can also go down. Is that wrong?
Not really. It's you're giving these people way too much credit. They're not even that smart, honestly. I mean, I've dealt with governments for a long time. And you used to be able to have an intelligent conversation with Reagan or Margaret Thatcher. There isn't anybody in any country that I think I could sit down with and not, have to draw cartoons to explain something,
How was Thatcher to talk to, Martin? How was Thatcher to talk to, Martin?
Thatcher was very smart, very intelligent. And we were, because a lot of, Japanese were trying to get into Europe for the EU and all the rest of the stuff, and they knew the euro was coming. So we were actually doing the work doing the strategic location for them. So if they needed skilled labor, I was putting all those in Britain because the labor costs were 40% less compared to Germany.
Right.
And so I happen to have known her personal advisor, Alan Walters. And this rumor got around and that there's this guy sending all these companies to Britain. And he says, yeah, I know. That's Marty. She says, you know him? I want to talk to him. And that's how I got to meet her.
Ah.
But she was intelligent enough to understand the issue. Whereas, I mean, even go back to James Baker and the Plaza Accord and all that. They came up, oh, well, if we lower the value of the dollar, we'll be able to sell more goods overseas. And that's when I went to Reagan. I said, you people are going to cause a crash in a couple of years. Don't you realize you lower the value of the dollar? That means all assets that they're buying, U.S. debt, stocks, everything goes down 40%.
Yeah.
And they go, well, why would they sell? Because it's going down. I mean, honestly, the people in government are nowhere near what a lot of these conspiracy theories project.
Right.
They're not that smart, I'm telling you. You really have to explain a lot of things. I mean, just look at climate change. If you put everybody in electric cars, the power grid's not going to support it. I mean, don't you take one step forward to think what would happen if you did this? What are you going to do to the steel plants and all this? I mean, nobody seems to think any of this stuff through.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your thought about the de-dollarization these days?
That was set in motion by the U.S. putting sanctions on Russia. All of a sudden, you had a lot of these countries beginning to realize that the dollar was no longer independent, but it was a political weapon. And when Russia went into Crimea in 2014, Obama went to SWIFT and wanted to have them removed. And SWIFT said, no, you're not taking the system and turning it into a political weapon.
Who is SWIFT? Who runs SWIFT, Martin?
Well, they replaced him in 1999. They put in somebody that, whatever you want to do. So now that's what the BRICS is really about. They're beginning to realize that, hey, the U.S. can remove you from the financial system if you don't do what they tell them to do. So that's why, China's setting up its chip system. I mean, these ideas that come from the neocons is, again, they are not that smart. All they think about is what's right in front of them. They don't realize you do that to China, you're going to send a message to everybody else in the world. Yep. And I mean, the real brain dead thing is they bash China over Taiwan. China happens to be the largest holder of U.S. debt. So what do? You say, would you please buy another $1 trillion so we can buy some missiles to shoot you? I mean, they don't even look at this stuff from a practical perspective. And that's why they want Biden. This is not really an election between Trump and Biden. It's really an election between a deep state and basically freedom, really. Because, I've been to these cabinet meetings. The president sits there at the head of the table, and what happens is he's the referee. So you have all these agencies vying for power. All right. And somebody has to stand between them and say, no, if you do that, then the Treasury is not going to do this, etc. Biden's not even there 40% of the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. And trust me, he's in la la land when he is. All right. So you can see that what's going on is because every agency is just doing their own thing.
Yeah.
You have environmental people outlawing gas stoves. You have the neocons in State Department trying to create World War III. Nobody's doing anything on a coordinated basis. And that's why I say a lot of these conspiracy theories, trust me, they have not been there. And they're giving these people way too much credit for intelligence when they don't have it.
I'm not sure if that's reassuring or if that's even more scary.
Well, that's why, they don't want Trump because you're going to have somebody actually sitting there as a referee.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the real problem. I mean, regardless of what you think about Trump one way or another, they're like children, 2-year-old children. If daddy says no, they go to mommy, right?
I don't want to think about the leaders that way, Martin. That's scary. They have nuclear bombs.
It is. I mean, honestly, when I first heard about really what was going on with these neocons, was back when Reagan was there, and Gorbachev was hinting about he wanted to meet, and he wanted to meet with him.
Hmm.
And the neocons said, no, you can't do that. You can never trust a Russian. Now, Reagan said, forget it, I'm meeting. And if he didn't meet, the Berlin Wall would still be up.
Yeah.
I mean, these people, look, I know Bill Kristol, whose father started the whole neocon stuff, and Bill wrote the book to go into Iraq. Their theory, I mean, I've been to dinner with these people and argued back and forth. I understand what their theory is.
Can you share us some of behind the scenes from those dinners, Martin?
Well,
I'm very curious.
And also elaborate a little bit on who the neocons are for the listener who do not know anything about it.
It's a whole bunch of them, really. But I mean, even the New York Times has written about Victoria Nuland, her husband Kagan. Kagan is the one that wrote for the opinion in the Washington Post and said, oh, if Trump is elected, he'll be a dictator. He's the one who started that. Why? Because Victoria Nuland was out of every administration except for Trump's. John Bolton, I mean, he would invade Canada to get one Russian. You know, I mean, he's just a horrible, horrible person. And these people are callous. I mean, I went to Mar-a-Lago for dinner with Trump when he was back, I think it was March of 2020. And that was the first time I heard him even talk about exiting Afghanistan.
Right.
But the reason was interesting. He said he was sick and tired of writing letters to their families to say, your son died in Afghanistan. And he said, for what? And to quote him, he basically said, they've been fighting over borders there for 1,000 years. What difference are we going to make? Now, I mean, he was the first head of state that ever cared about the people that actually died on the battlefield.
Right.
The rest of them seem to be, that's just part of the game, and okay, yeah, big deal. I mean, I love Margaret Thatcher. We were very good friends, and we go to her house for even Christmas, but not even Maggie even said something like that over the Falkland Wars. All right. I own, it's like Pfizer. They just turn the other, to the left because they go, well, everybody, there's always people that die from a vaccine. We accept that, they take no responsibility. That's why they don't want to be sued for anything. I mean, one guy that works for me, his whole family is very allergic to vaccines. They can't even take any kind of even a flu shot. They get sick. So we're not all the same. All right. There are definitely people that are going to get very sick and others not. So you can't make a blanket statement, and that's why they want immunity. But they have no remorse for those that die. And political leaders, the same thing. You just have Macron saying we should be sending NATO troops into Ukraine. How many people are going to die? Do you care? And then you have Poland, coming out. Oh well, if Ukraine falls, we're going to have to go in there ourselves. These people have never learned. I mean, how many died from World War II?
Yeah.
And all you got to do is Google it, and you'll see that more civilians die in wars than soldiers.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think that the neocons seem to be a class of their own, and they're on both sides. So it's not Republican versus Democrat or something. They're on both sides. And somebody like Bill Kristol, I knew Bill. He was became the chief of staff in the Bush White House for quail. And when he left, I remember we went to dinner. He knew my opinion of government. And I didn't say, he goes, all right, SOB, you were right. I never got to do anything I wanted to do. I said, welcome to Washington, But so now he's advising the Democrats. He'll go whoever wants war. And like I said, I was in conversations with these people, and their theory is regime change. And they actually said to me face to face that if you got rid of all the dictators in the Middle East, that would create peace.
And I do they believe that themselves, Martin?
Pardon me?
Do they believe that themselves?
Yes, this is what they actually believe. I think it stems from Khrushchev when he said, we will bury you. And then they got their backs up and, well, we're going to spread, democracy to the world. And even though communism fell, they're still on the same agenda. Honestly, I think they're angry because communism fell and they didn't get to shoot anybody. But there was no D-Day, no storming the Moscow or anything like that. But they haven't changed. Like I said, they told Reagan, you can never trust a Russian. All right. So, it seems as though they've gotten themselves into almost a racist type hatred thing. And it just makes no sense. But I mean, if we were against communism, it was because, it's like Schwab says, you'll own nothing and be happy, right? Which didn't turn out so well. But, it's fine. I was younger. Yeah, communism was bad. All right. But things have changed. Communism is gone. And I can tell you, I know a lot of people from Eastern Europe that have come to the United States, and they're very alarmed because they say this, what I was fleeing from is now happening here. They see the same thing. And I think it's always, once you hand power to anybody, they always want more. And I don't care if they're left, right, or whatever, but it's just the way it is.
If you look at the perspective of investing these days, Martin, what's your thoughts about doing some smart investments?
What's your predictions?
You have to understand that, one, the United States was basically bankrupt in 1896, which is when J.P. Morgan had to lend $100 million in gold to bail it out. It was 70% agrarian back then. The Industrial Revolution was kind of just starting. And effectively, after World War I, the United States displaced Britain as the financial capital. And then after World War II, the U.S. ended up with 76% of the world official gold reserves. And that's why the dollar became Bretton Woods and all the rest of this stuff. All right. So it was World War I and II that actually made the United States what it is today. Without war in Europe, the U.S. would have been an agrarian society. They wouldn't have made all the weapons and guns and sold them to Europe. Or grow the food. I mean, actually, the richest man probably that has ever existed, other maybe a close tie with the Roman Emperor Augustus, but is basically from World War I, and Ogden Armour hot dogs. He supplied all the meat for the soldiers during World War I. And the commodities crashed in 1919. And you can probably, find it I found it in an old newspaper in Washington on the Wall Street Journal. He went from the richest man in the world to living on the charity of friends in London.
Wow.
And they asked him, what do how do you think about this? And he says he knew he would always be remembered for losing more money than anybody in history. He lost the equivalent of maybe about, $1 to $2 billion a day for almost 200 days straight.
Wow.
I mean, it makes, Bill Gates and Buffett look like pikers, But he had it. He was the king of commodities. At least the, Armour hot dogs are still named after him. But, I mean, he was the richest man in the world.
Huh.
And he lost because the commodities crashed once World War I was done. So, from an investment standpoint, you have to understand that if you have virtually every leader in Europe cheering World War III now, and in all honesty, what's going on is when they were forming the euro, they actually came to me. I sat down with them. I warned them that this is not going to work. You had to consolidate the debts. They were selling it that everybody will pay the single interest rate and all this stuff, eliminating volatility in the currency, help trade, blah, blah, blah. And I said, but you have to consolidate the debts if you really want to compete with the dollar. And it was Kohl out of Germany, who you can probably Google. Germans never were given a right to vote on joining the euro. He did it authoritatively, and he even admits he acted like a dictator. All right. And to do that, the Germans are very concerned about debt. So he made the criteria Germany will join only if there's no consolidation of debt. So I warned him this is going to fail because all you were doing was transferring the volatility from the currency markets to the bond markets.
Right.
So every individual country pays their own different interest rate according to their credit rating. I said, that's, fine. In the U.S., we have one currency, but you have 50 states and they all pay different interest rates according to their credit rating. You can't just compare to the federal government. You have to consolidate the debts to do that, and they wouldn't do it. So honestly, what's coming down the road here is that governments collapse when they're in these Ponzi schemes. And they keep borrowing, year after year with no intention of paying anything back. The city of Mons there in Germany, you can Google that one too. They defaulted during the 14th century. They were doing exactly the same thing. I think even the Pope ended up excommunicating the politicians for doing it. And they defaulted. And the default comes when you sell new debt to pay off the old and nobody buys. And that's why I was saying, these people are crazy because they're bashing China. China's been starting to sell U.S. debt. The end game here is that if you can't sell the new debt, guess what? It defaults.
What happens then, Martin?
And that's what's going on here. And I think that's why they need war. Because they know they can't rescue this system. Right. So they want war. They're going to do this digital currency for the new Bretton Woods too. Look, even I've had conversations with these people that standard is that they assume that 35% of everybody in Europe and America does not pay what they're supposed to in taxes. So that's their belief, period. And that's why they want the digital currency. You hire that 16-year-old girl next door to watch the kids while you and your wife go out, and you gave her a $20 bill. Oh my God, she didn't pay taxes. This is the way they look at the world. You had Janet Yellen coming out saying that they wanted to audit down to $600 to get the rich. Okay, I don't think Elon Musk is selling a used bike on eBay for $600. All right.
No.
Their definition of the rich is anybody that has a job. That's it. It's you go after the professional class. I mean, we just had an audit that went on for 4 months over just payroll taxes. It must have cost, I don't know, $30,000 to $40,000 in professional fees. And I did get an email, 2 days ago, and says, "Oh, okay, fine, audit's done. You don't know anything. Thank you very much." But so any big company, you have your lawyers and your accountants. You don't do that stuff. Yeah. I have no idea. I don't get involved in all the payroll taxes and stuff like. So they go after the middle class people because they don't have that. All right. But the bigger you get, you have no choice but to do that. There's too many regulations. We had to have lawyers on every continent because the laws change everywhere. So if you're a small operation, or just an individual, they're the ones they're going after.
Yeah.
Because you're not armed, to defend them.
Have you got any specific dates over the next few months that you feel will go either up for a while or take the market down?
Gold has been showing like April.
Yeah.
But May has been coming up like in the stock market, the ruble, things of this nature.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you take this so-called Moscow terrorist attack, all right. First of all, I think this is the first Islamic terrorist attack where the guys did not kill themselves. I mean, nobody believes this in the real world over here. Islamic terrorists basically think it's a holy war. So if they die in that event, then all sins are forgiven and they go to heaven. And they get their 73 virgins or 72 or whatever it is. These guys, somebody was filming it. Okay. And then they put it online immediately. This was a stunt. Okay. And then the four of them were trying to bolt back to Ukraine. Look, I can pick up the phone and say, hey, it's ISIS, whatever, that doesn't prove anything. But these actions are very strange because, first of all, Putin supports Iran. When Hamas went into Israel, you had Nikki Haley saying, oh, they did it on October 7th because that was a birthday, present for Putin. So now all of a sudden you got Islamic terrorists killing, hundreds of people in Moscow. It's just, why? U.S. said, oh, well, we warned them that there was going to be, a terrorist attack. How did the U.S. know? Look, I mean, this is all part of the regime change. And Putin has come out and says he's going to, further investigate who else was behind it.
Right.
But look, this I do not believe, and most of my sources, nobody seems to believe this has anything to do with ISIS. And Putin won the election. They don't like that. And he gets sworn in on May 7th. So why, basically this attack, the rumor mill is that they keep hoping, like the sanctions, that they do this and the people will rise up and overthrow Putin.
Right.
It's just not going to work. The Russian people know who's behind all this stuff. It's they don't think it's Putin doing something, personally here. And, as I said, I did that book on the plot to seize Russia. I was in the middle of all that stuff back in 99.
Yeah.
I know firsthand because they asked me to put in $10 billion into this Hermitage Capital Fund. And they were going to get all the gold, all the diamonds, all the platinum, and all the oil. And it was all going to be strip mined from Russia. And they were putting in their puppet, was going to be Boris Berezovsky. And you can also Google, okay, he supposedly committed suicide because he had also you'll find on, you can Google it and find out they're called his begging letters. He wrote back to Putin apologizing, can I please come back to Russia? So they couldn't say Putin killed him. Because, all right, fine, come on back, and then I'll take care of you when you get here, So supposedly he committed suicide in his bathtub.
Right.
All right. His bodyguard has come out, and that's also on official record. He said MI6 took him out. I believe the CIA took out Safra because as this thing was falling apart, then certainly Berezovsky wanted to get back to Russia and he would have confessed everything. And what it was about was that they were trying to take over Russia then. They staged they got Yeltsin to take $7 billion from the money, from the IMF, steered a wire through Bank of New York into Geneva. And then immediately the Department of Justice runs in, biggest money laundering in history. All right. The two bankers for Bank of New York, I have the transcripts. They got 6 months house arrest for the biggest money laundering in history. The judge just said, all right, to be money laundering, there's got to be some sort of crime. So the judge says, so what was this over? Oh, it included a ransom for a Russian businessman. Oh, okay, fine, thank you. He doesn't even ask the name. I mean, come on. Who could pay $7 billion in cash? Not even Warren Buffett could do that or Bill Gates. Cash we're talking about. And a wire. If some Russian businessman paid that much for a ransom, I think we would all know who it was. So this is all nonsense. And but they were trying to take over Russia back then. And that's why Hillary blamed Putin to begin with, because they were interfering in the Russian 2000 election. So that's why and what Yeltsin did, what really happened, he's getting attacked by the West on one side with this money laundering stuff. The hardliners were using it and filed an impeachment motion against them in Russia to take it back to, the USSR days. And that's why Yeltsin, they did this in July. By, I think it was August 9th, Yeltsin turns to Putin because he wasn't a communist and he wasn't an oligarch. And his last words to him, protect Russia. That's why he had over 70% approval rating. The people were like, thank God they didn't want to go back to communism. And they certainly were against all the oligarchs. So he stood in the middle. That's why he was so popular. And that's why they hate him. Because he basically, not him personally, but, their whole plot to take over Russia was failed back then. So now they keep saying, desperately trying, oh, the fake, he's not that. Look, who was going to run against them? This old, 80-some-year-old guy who was the head of the Communist Party. People are not going to vote for that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of people in Eastern Europe. I mean, there's no way anybody wants to go back. The same thing in China. I mean, I have one politician, oh, well, it's the Communist Party. I said, you don't understand Asia at all, do you? I said, they're not communist. I said, but they can't change the name of the party because then they would have to take Mao's picture down and say he was wrong. So they leave the name in place, but it's not communist. At least Putin criticized Lenin. He said they were just a bunch of Bolsheviks. They don't do that in China. Okay, nobody's going to go up there and throw darts at Mao. And they don't want to admit that whole period was wrong. So we just don't talk about it. And it's the same thing with Taiwan. They didn't need to go into Taiwan as everybody pretended, yes, there's one China. All right. Then when Biden comes in and we're going to defend, Taiwan, Pelosi gets on a plane. Now you're slapping them in the face. Now they have to take Taiwan. They didn't have to before. Everybody agreed, yes, there's one China. They're separate, but there's one China. So it's an image that is really the issue more than anything. The old Asian issue of, saving face. It's very important over there.
I've heard you talk about China not being a communist country anymore previously on a podcast a year ago. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? When you say that it's not anymore. Like, what are the greatest distinctions that you see that you know of?
Communism means that the government owns everything.
Yep.
All right, so there wouldn't be a bunch of billionaires or anything of that nature. Authoritarian, yes. Okay, you can make, our governments are becoming much more authoritarian too. But communism means, like Schwab, you'll own nothing and be happy. So communism fell over there the same way as it fell in Russia, and I can tell you why. I was actually, when the 1997 Asian currency crisis took place, I was actually the first one from the West that was invited to the Bank of China. And I went because, hey, I wanted to go see, the Great Wall. I figured I'm going to have to listen to a bunch of bureaucrats and, okay, fine. It's typical when I deal with other governments. But I was quite surprised. And then I understood why they called me in. Because they were all traders. China had sent people out and they worked on the dealing desk in Tokyo, London, New York. Then they went back to run the Bank of China. So I was quite surprised that they invited me rather than some academic from Harvard or something. And then I was taken off in a motorcade. You would have thought I was president of the United States, honestly. And they took me to this military, looked like a military facility. Had 3 huge satellites on top, surrounded by tanks, etc. So this is back in 97. All right. And I'm like, oh my God, where the heck am I going? And they took me into this room and there were hundreds of people there surfing the internet. And they were downloading everything they possibly could. And they took me back into a room and they had downloaded everything I ever wrote and they all read it. And I was like, really? Oh my God. And the questions I got was basically to help them become capitalists. And I could see the thinking process. They were tracking everything, but they were not interfering. There were actually 249 varieties of tea, which I never knew there were that many.
Wow.
And they were asking me, why does this one tea, for example, sell for $1 here, but $5 over there? I said, well, where's it, coming from? Well, here. I said, well, first you have transportation costs. They go, oh, yes. Okay. All right. I said, then somebody will pay more for one versus another if they like it more. Oh, okay. See, under communism, this is why it fell. If it's $1 here, it had to be $1 over there, even if it cost you $10 to get it there.
Right.
That's why it was so inefficient. And communism is not, this whole Marxist idea does not work. I had a friend who grew up in East Germany, and the day the wall fell, his father went and got a Stasi file, and he saw that everybody that he thought were friends were reporting on him.
Wow. And
he came home and he started punching holes in the walls. He thought his father was crazy, and he starts pulling out microphones. All right, wow. And to this day, his father refuses to speak to anybody but family. But because of Stalin was very paranoia. And so therefore, he was worried about what people were thinking. Whereas China had a different type of communism. This is why they were able to recoup very quickly. Their communism was basically what they called the tall poppy syndrome.
Right.
Stick your head up above anybody else that gets cut off. All right. So they weren't really concerned about what you thought, and whereas Stalin just killed millions of people for what they thought. I mean, the economist Kondratiev, he charged them twice, and after that, they couldn't keep him in prison any longer. He sentenced them again and then took them out in the back parking lot and just shot him. Yeah. He didn't like his forecast that, look, sorry, there's this business cycle here and it's going to fail.
Yeah.
I mean, even...
I have to ask you something, Martin.
Yeah.
Because the Japanese, they heightened their rates, the central bank, the other day. What you think about the Japanese market these days? Do you think it's going to go upwards and be fine, or going the other way?
Now, Japan's in serious trouble. I mean, they've got the worst debt crisis probably than anybody. The stock market is going up. You have to understand that equity has an international value. All right. So if the currency goes down by 40%, the stock would go up 40%, and that's just staying even.
Yeah.
All right. If it went down, the currency goes down 40% and the stock's only 20%, you can buy the company, sell its assets, and make a profit. That was the whole takeover boom in the 80s. Yeah. And, they made the movie Wall Street Week. They didn't understand it. It was basically, the dollar had gone up so far into 1985. It's when the pound fell to virtually par, 103. And after that, it was the big takeover boom. So, because you had the Plaza Accord and Jim Baker were going to lower the value of the dollar by 40%. So, I said, look, the market's going to go up to new highs because just staying even, when you lower a currency by 40%, the assets go up. It's just simple as that. But these people don't understand, international capital flows or anything. They really do not. And, I mean, I can't tell you, but I was asked by two separate universities if I would go back to teach. And I said, I really appreciate it. I'm working on a book now so they can use it. But I said, I really don't want to come back and just teach some, a class in the university. And I asked them, why did you come and ask me? And I was shocked. The response was, we know what we teach no longer works.
There you go.
And they're still teaching Keynesian economics. That's why the central banks are in trouble. That, raising interest rates to reduce inflation doesn't work. Why? Because when Keynes came up with that theory back in the Great Depression, U.S. had a balanced budget. So you were basically, yes, you're affecting us. We were the demand.
Right.
Today, government's the biggest borrower. They raise rates to make us buy less. Does that have any impact upon the government? No. Nobody says,
not.
oh, gee, we should spend less. The interest payments go up. I mean, I remember the days of Reagan, the national debt hit $1 trillion and everybody was freaking out. Now we have interest payments at $1 trillion.
Yeah. Yeah. Insane.
They just don't step back and look. Because, I don't know what it is, why those people who want to run governments and stuff, maybe they just like psychologically to tell everybody else what to do, but they're not qualified.
Have you seen the documentary The Great Taking by David Webb, Martin?
Yeah. It's not on point, really. Look, it's true that, you're talking about unsecured assets versus secured assets. All right, fine. The government's not going to take all your assets. I mean, that would be revolution. They're not even that smart. All right.
Back to giving them too much credit again.
Again, honestly, it's, they know at this point, this is what, I've been on the opposite side of the table with Schwab. He's been telling them to basically default. And that's why you'll own nothing and be happy. And he's just basically a Marxist. All right. Yeah. And I've been saying, listen, this is, you're barking up the wrong tree, and this thing is not going to be sustainable. I've did a solutions conference, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, said this is the way out. But it means they give up power. And look, even take this, why we have debts. Before 1970, if you had a government e-bond and you went to the bank and said, I want to borrow, it's a $100 bond, I want to borrow, $50 against it. It was illegal. They were not allowed to lend on government bonds. That's why the theory was it's less inflationary to borrow than to print. But after Bretton Woods fell, if you want to trade futures, what do you can post T-bills as collateral. Bonds are now just simply money that pays interest. So that old theory, it's less inflationary. It's now less inflationary to print. You don't have to pay interest on it. Yeah. And all these people that blame the central banks and stuff, they don't understand what's going on here.
In what way, Martin?
The central bank doesn't control the money supply anymore. The bulk of it is created by the debt. The central bank has no power over, the fiscal budget. So everything has changed. It's just turned upside down. This is why they asked me if I would go teach at a university, because all the old theories are out the window.
Yeah.
But if the central banks don't have that much power, why are all the people in the market waiting to see what the Fed is saying these days?
Because they haven't figured it out yet.
Mm.
Just you can call up a chart of the Fed discount rate. They started raising the interest rate in 2016 when Trump came to power. They raised rates all the way. The stock market rallied. They called it the Trump rally.
Hmm.
All right. We've done studies on this, and it's very simple. If you think the stock market's going to go up 50%, you'll borrow and pay 20.
Hmm.
But if you don't think it's going to go up 1%, you're not going to pay 1%.
Right.
It's the expectation that is important, not the actual level of interest rates.
Hmm.
And I mean, we've got, data on interest rates back to 3000, BC, basically. And you look at the legal code of Hammurabi, it's really, wage and price controls. The Emperor Diocletian did that in 284. So did Richard Nixon in 1971. It's always the same thing. All right. So interest rates are simply, they're supposed to be. If I think the inflation is going to be 5%, I want 8% because I want to make sure my purchasing power remains the same. Okay. But the Fed can't control it anymore. Because, I mean, just look at Biden's talking about a $7.5 trillion deficit, spending in 1 year. In 1 year.
But who is buying all that debt, Martin?
That's the problem. If you can't sell it, it comes crashing down. All right. And that's why I go back to that meeting. You have a cabinet meeting. There should be somebody there to run referee. And right. Biden is not that. So you have the neocons in the State Department threatening China. Then you have the Treasury Department yelling, hopping on a plane, going over and please buy our debt. And it just doesn't work. There's nothing that's being coordinated at all. People don't.
I'm just curious, Martin. Who in their right mind is buying that debt at this moment?
Most of the debt, particularly in Europe, if you look at the laws, like a pension fund, must have government debt by law.
Why is that?
It varies. 70%, some are like 90%. Oh, because government debt's safe. You see, they rig it that way. One of our clients was one of the biggest pension funds, and I won't say what country, but they looked at our stuff. They started selling government debt and replacing it with private debt. S&P went in and they said, "Oh, you're taking on more risk." They said, "No." We looked at what Armstrong was saying. We ran our own stuff, and he's correct. Government's default, not private sector. If the private sector defaults, all right, if General Motors went into default, goes into bankruptcy, you still get something back. Government defaults, you can't go down to the art museum and start lifting Picassos. You get zero back when a government defaults. Right. Zero. Plus, scary. You have to understand, government will never prosecute itself. All right. You take the
good points.
Honestly, the old S&L crisis. The government created it. The Democrats came in and they said, "Oh, all these people making too much tax credits on their real estate," so they removed it. One of the congressmen stood on the floor. I knew, and he said, "We do this, we're going to cause a crash." Oh, no. And that was the S&L, real estate crashed. Then you took the S&Ls and you said they must invest in real estate versus a commercial bank. So then the S&Ls start going down. Oh, that's fraud they were engaged in. Government never takes responsibility, ever, for anything. All right? Italy had, when they couldn't pay, what did they do? You bought 90-day paper. Oh, we're converting it to 10-year. Thank you very much. All right. They can do whatever they want. So I, honestly, just be careful about having any government debt whatsoever. Federal, state, local, municipal, whatever.
The last time we spoke, Martin, you were skeptical to Bitcoin. Have you changed your mind since the last time we spoke?
No, not really. Look, it's a trading vehicle. Okay, I mean, the sales pitch that, oh, it's going to replace the dollar or something like that. Come on, I mean, that's absolutely absurd. But second of all, I mean, look, there's a lot of people that have believed that the whole Bitcoin thing was created by the CIA and the rest of them to float this whole idea of CBDCs. You have actually BlackRock looking at possibly trying to maybe take over Bitcoin. Why? During COVID, we learned
only good intentions. Only good intentions.
You have to understand, during COVID, people suddenly beginning to learn the Constitution does not give you a constitutional right to free speech. That is nonsense. Okay? Read the First Amendment. It says the government shall not. All right? Not Facebook, YouTube, everybody else. All right? They're using that in the CBDCs. The Federal Reserve is not going to issue a CBDC. The top 5 banks are all creating their own right now to be regulated. Why? And that's why BlackRock's looking at taking over Bitcoin. Because there are already banking rules that they are supposed to report suspicious activity. If the bank reports you, the government doesn't need a search warrant to go find out. They just go in. All right. So if you have the CBDCs are actually private, simply regulated by the Fed. They don't need search warrants. It's the same thing as COVID. You have no constitutional rights. Oh, right now, if I give you $100 bill, they don't know where I got it from. But if I give you $100 in Bitcoin, guess what? They can see where I got it from and all the way down the line. That's why I don't like about Bitcoin. And I think it was created for this very purpose. It's got everybody, digital currencies, they're great, blah, whatever. They do this. We call it floating a balloon. All right. You do that, and if it comes from the private sector, then they trust it. If the government came out and did it, they wouldn't trust it. So, if you're going to create a digital currency, why did you need it so that you can trace it all the way back? Why?
Good point.
All right.
Good point.
Why can't it just be a digital currency and I give you this and they don't know where I got it from or whatever? It was, I believe the deep state deliberately created it, and you have this fictitious thing. Oh, well, who actually created it? Nobody really knows. If you created it, you would be entitled to such a huge profit. Why haven't they come forward?
But we see that a lot of countries are starting to buy up Bitcoins these days. It's China, Finland, Japan, and some other countries. Ecuador, El Salvador. Why do you think that a lot of countries are buying this?
Most of them don't understand the real, ramifications behind it. But they're all going to be moving towards a digital currency anyhow. China is definitely doing it. China understands what's at stake here, and they are more authoritarian. So, but in all honesty, the solution here is all you have to do is look at the Roman Empire. All right, they had 1,000 years of peace. Why? Yes, they conquered these lands. And then they found out they could sell their products across the empire. Everybody benefited. All right. Taxes were minimal. The maximum tax reached 7%, and people thought that was a lot. All right. And so you're looking at things that were that showed us how to create world peace. And we were on that road. Then you put the sanctions in against Russia, take them out. Then China, as long as everybody's benefiting, the Russian people are not going to want to create war because they're going to lose money from it. The Chinese people, the same way. And even today, do Europeans want to go in and occupy Russia? Or Americans want to, China? The average person does not. It's always the leaders that do this stuff. All right. I think the one of the oldest veterans before he died from World War One, because all the people that died, he says, we should have just taken the leaders, throw them in a room, give them all a gun, and told them to sort it out.
Yeah.
And it's actually true.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the stuff we hear all the time is just fake news. Weapons of mass destruction, the Lusitania. I mean, all this stuff. They've never told the truth about anything. In fact, there is a good video I would recommend watching on YouTube about Robert McNamara.
Okay.
He was the neocon for Vietnam, and before he died, I think wanted to clear his conscience, and he said we were wrong. Russia was never involved. It was just a civil war. And I'm doing this because we shouldn't be making the same mistake again.
I have to ask you something when I have you here, Martin, about I think a lot of people believe that Bitcoin can be a nice way to hedge your investment, for example. But it's can be scary to have your money in the bank account. What do you say to those people that think that it's a nice hedge?
Look, Bitcoin can be seized with a stroke of a pen. I would prefer, honestly, if you want to have some sort of a hedge, I would, use old, gold coins, honestly. Look, that's why a lot of them have survived, because they didn't come and knocking on your door and taking the gold out of your sock drawer, But I mean, Bitcoin, any digital currency, when you travel, you're supposed to even say that you have that. Yes, there are a number of countries because that technically you're bringing money across the border. You can access it while you're there. You have to look at these theories that these people are using. You didn't bring your bank account with you, but a digital currency, and they can look at your laptop. A number of them do. When I've traveled, I've gotten maybe $5,000 out of a bank, and I keep the receipt in there. And I come back, and if I didn't use it, well, why you got that? I said, did you ever have a credit card stolen and you're overseas? I said, here's the receipt. I took it from the bank, all right, as a precaution. And then they go, oh, okay, yeah, I understand that. And then you go, all right. But if I didn't have the receipt in there, oh, well, who gave this to you? Where's our 50%? You got to prove where it came from.
Right. Huh.
So they're going to
Very.
do that with digital currency. You hop on a plane, you go over there, you had 10,000 in digital currency, and you come back and it's 20,000. Oh, how about that?
What I find fascinating, interesting, and scary at the same time is how to navigate these waters these days. Is it going to be war in Europe? Or are the banks going to fail? We haven't seen the New York Bank is struggling. We see that the inflation rate in Norway is pretty high at the moment. So it's extremely hard, Martin, for normal people to navigate the waters
Yeah,
these
look,
days.
you don't want to keep all your assets in one basket, basically. Europeans can open up an account in the United States, at least for now. And I would, you kind of look at equities of like the blue chip type stuff. If you compare the three indexes in the U.S., the Nasdaq, the S&P, and the Dow, you'll see the Dow has been the one that's been rising faster than everything else, going off to new highs versus Nasdaq. Why? Because the big money, that's where it goes. The big international money. This is what I warned them. Why, if you didn't consolidate the debts in Europe, it wasn't going to be successful, because a big institution wants to just call up and say, buy me 10 billion of that. Fine. Now he has to look at every single country there in the EU, the same way he would be looking at all the state debts in the US. Or do I want Texas or do I want Massachusetts? You're going to make all these decisions. So I would, look at the liquid basic equities, the ones that would have good, solid balance sheets, assets. That's really what you're kind of looking at, because they're going to appreciate because of inflation. As I said about the takeover boom. All right, the dollar was at record highs in 85. The takeover boom took off after that. Why? Because they had tangible assets. When we were looking at this, the Dow from a book value, perspective bottomed in 1977. All right, so the takeover boom was you could buy these companies, sell their assets, and double your money. That's why the stocks were just going up like crazy. Right. I mean, the movie Wall Street Week, was, about it, but they didn't really understand what was really going on behind the scenes. But, that's basically it. So a good company with tangible assets, those assets with inflation are going to go up. Okay. So that would always provide a floor to the value of the company.
Right. Yeah.
But aren't you also seeing a lot of buybacks these days?
Yeah, because they have a lot of cash. It's plus you have the Biden administration assuming anybody that has money offshore, oh, you're not paying taxes. So a lot of them have brought it back. And so what do you do with it? They've been reducing, they've been buying back their shares. I mean, that was happening going into 1929 as well. And
that is not a good year to compare with.
No, I mean, the problem that it created during the crash, they had bought back so much stock, they couldn't now sell stock.
Right.
That was the big problem.
Right.
So
that's not good.
Yeah, you have to look, there's always a double-edged sword to everything. And you got to make sure you look at both sides.
But don't you think that a lot of these large companies have borrowed money to buy back their stocks? So aren't they going to have some problems with the interest rates in the near future?
A lot of companies we told to go ahead and do that at fixed rates.
Okay.
That you're getting it at 1.5%, take it as long as you possibly can right now, because rates are going up. It's the interest rates were just artificially low for so long. It was insane, really.
When you're doing buybacks, aren't you just inflating your stock value in reality?
You're basically you're changing the book value to the stock, yes. So your dividends do go up because you're still making a lot of money, but fewer shares are participating.
Right. So this is do you think it's still a good strategy to do that, or is that over for now?
I would say no, because we're after May. Looks like we're heading more into a recessionary period into 2028. And I would say you wouldn't want to do that now. You might want to start accumulating cash. Or you would get into a situation like they did after 1929. When they needed the money, they couldn't raise it.
Right.
Right. So buying companies can be a good strategy in the near future.
Yeah, you're just trying to park your money. And I mean, look, there's, two sides to a coin. Sometimes it's the government that goes down, which we're in right now. Other times it's the private sector.
Yep.
Right now it's government.
Yep.
And, that's the real problem. They've all just been borrowing year after year with no intention of paying anything back. And I mean, I've been in meetings. I said, this is not going to last forever. And they've said, oh, no, we're the government. We're different. Okay. Good luck with that one.
I don't think this is going to happen, but let's say it's going to happen, that Norwegian kroner is going bust. Can we lose our money in the bank account, do you think?
It all depends upon the bank and what their investment portfolio strategy has been. I mean, Norway has one of the biggest oil funds there. They've done very well from that perspective. I think it's always back and forth between them and Abu Dhabi as to who's the biggest. But maybe it's a ping pong match back and forth. But look, the biggest problem I think that Norway faces is that you have people even there from Sweden that just keep talking about war. I mean, Sweden's been at war with Russia, I think, at least 15 times. It's been going on for a long time. The Swedish Empire even went all the way down and included Kiev at one point, historically. So, I don't know why, but, nobody seems to want to even talk about peace.
Yeah.
No money in that, Martin.
Yeah, I mean, look,
sadly,
Trump is correct. This war will be over in 24 hours. All you have to do is honor the Minsk agreement. That's it. Done. All right. And people don't realize what, honestly, I think Zelensky is deliberately trying to create war, and that's what he was hired to do. Because he's outlawed the Russian language there. All right. He has now recently said outlawed Orthodox religion. Christmas will be celebrated on December 25th. I think if Canada tried to outlaw French, you're going to see a civil war there too. Or if the United States tried to outlaw, Spanish, you just don't do these things. And they're certainly not to promote peace. And it seems like constantly just poking the bear. They want
But can we
war.
have peace these days in these economic situations that we are in at the moment?
We could have. I mean, I don't think that we stand a chance in hell of getting these warmongers out of power. I mean, they can rig the elections now. I mean, look, 30 years ago, they at least pretended to be that they were honest. Today, it's like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? They don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't
But
imagine somebody 30 years ago launching these many criminal investigations against your opponent in an election. I mean, Brazil, they're going after Barcelona's, Barzanowski, Bolsonaro. They're going after him and say, oh, U.S. did it, so that's a good idea. They tried it in Argentina. I mean, this is starting to spread. It's not good.
But you have been on the opposite side of a lot of these people, Martin, for some years now. So how is it being in the meetings with all these powerful people and suddenly being on the opposite side where they want to take you, where they want to take you down?
I think honestly, I keep getting these calls because they want to see if I change my mind. I mean, I get calls
Have
from.
you?
It's not my personal opinion. It's the computer's been projecting this. It's not me. I mean, you can go back. I did the 2011 conference. I stood up and said the war cycle is going to turn in 2014. In 2013, you can Google our site. It said, okay, fine. Ukraine is the spot. That's where you got to pay attention. The computers picked all this stuff out amazingly because it's looking at absolutely everything. And when I created this model, never in a million years did I think it would do geopolitical. I just didn't even, that wasn't on my agenda. We had one of the big banks in Lebanon. Somebody found a ledger with all the Lebanese pound down in it, and they sent it off, and they said, gee, could you do a model on our currency for us? I said, sure, we put it in. I thought there was something wrong with the data. I called him. I said, look, something's got to be wrong here. It says your country's going to fall apart in 8 days. And very calmly, he said, well, what currency would you recommend? I said, well, it says Swiss francs. I was like, 8 days later, the Civil War began.
Yeah.
Over time, I mean, it did the same thing with Iraq, Iran war. We had a big Saudi client was big in shipping, and he called me and says, they're going to start attacking shipping in the Gulf tomorrow. What do you think gold's going to do? I said, you tell me a war's going to start tomorrow? Yeah. What do you think? Russia, I stood up and the London Financial Times put that on the front page in 98. Did a conference there in London. I think it was June 27th. I didn't know they had snuck in. I said, Russia's going to collapse, and I give it about 30 days. And that was the whole S&L. I mean, the whole crisis, the bond market, collapsed, long-term capital management. The Fed had to step in. It was, and London Financial Times had put that on the front page. Armstrong says Russia's going to collapse. So what I have discovered over the years, in Russia, for example, we saw 100 billion going in, but we saw 150 billion coming out. Not sustainable. In the case of Lebanon, obviously he's had us create the model because he already saw what was coming. All right. He came to us for the timing. All right. But he wouldn't have come to us if he didn't already see money moving. And over the years, at 9/11, they went and they were using our model to look for whoever bought puts on airlines, the day before or so. They realized that if you know an event's going to happen, you take advantage of it. if you move your money, or maybe you buy puts. But this is what they do. All right. The same thing on Israeli Hamas issue. Strangely enough, all the weapons, military stocks went up 2 or 3 days before. Why? All right. Who knew? So there's always information. If you know you're going to invade a country, you move your money in advance. Yeah. You have U.S. Hurling javelins at Russia. They're starting to sell off U.S. debt. All right. You don't want to own any U.S. debt if you're going to go in the war because they're going to default on it. Yeah. You don't pay your enemy. So. Pay attention to these sorts of things. What the computer does, it tracks absolutely everything. And I've come to understand what it does now over a 40-year period. It's damn good. But it's picking up things that we're not paying attention to, little subtle movements, etc. And that's basically what you're looking at. It's tracking all these things, and it sees the capital flows are starting to shift. Somebody's shifting it for a reason.
Right. The first time I spoke to you, Martin, I think it's 1.5 years ago, you said that it's most likely was going to be a revolution or uprising in the different countries in the West. You still think there is going to be an uprising?
Yes. Our computer tracks two things. One, it tracks civil unrest, which is domestic, and then it tracks international war. This is the first time both of them are pointing to the same period in time. And I think you can see the civil unrest. It's rising just about everywhere. I think the 2024 election in the U.S., that's going to be it. I mean, I don't care who wins. Neither side is going to accept it. We've reached that point. And the computer's showing very sharp increase in civil unrest in 2025 in the U.S. And you can see it. I mean, it's just, they demonize everything. I think even Jamie Dimon came out at Davos, and I was quite surprised. He came out and he blasted it. He says, Trump was right. He was right about China. He was right about NATO. All right. And he warned the Democrats, you better stop demonizing, these mega people. That's half the country. Yeah. And you're creating animosity between both sides. It's almost like, Hitler blaming the Jews because they own the banks and everything else. Then you just get people to just hate Jews. Yeah. It's the same psychological process. It doesn't matter who they are. People respond the same way. And I mean, there's a good book I would recommend, Obedience to Authority by Stanley Milgram. He conducted studies after World War II about the Germans because everybody said, oh, they killed all these, the Jews because they're just different. And he created, these things, took people off the streets in New York and whatever, and had an actor in there and said, every time he answers a question wrong, torture him a little bit more. And people were doing it. And the actor's going, oh, stop, please, I can't take it. And they kept doing it. And he concluded that you will torture somebody if you think the authority instructing you to do so is correct.
Before I ask about World War III and if it's going to happen or not, why do you think Jamie Dimon, Zuckerberg, and Bezos are selling so much stocks these days?
Basically to get liquid, I think. Plus, you have an awful lot of these people out there that have been calling for this great crash all the time. From 1929, they just keep looking at this, and I actually just did an interview in Germany, and I think I did one 2 years before, whatever. And they said, you were the only one who was right. Everybody's been calling for a recession for the last 2 years. You said no. Now you're saying it is, and they're going, oh, we got, I don't do this from a personal opinion perspective. Yeah. The computers taught me a lot. And I think they're making their mistake so you sell stock, and where you put the cash. You buy government bonds. Not a good idea right now. With war coming, I'm telling you, this is the problem. Why would anybody in their right mind, when they realize war is coming, buy a 10-year bond? Interest rates are going to rise, and then in times of war, you got to worry about who's going to be the victor. You can go on eBay and buy plenty of old bonds from different governments that defaulted. We used to have a whole hallway in our New Jersey office framed up with them. I said, what's with all the bonds? I said, to remind us what government does.
Do you think it's going to be a World War III then, from my understanding of what you're saying now?
They need it. That's the problem. It makes no sense to have... Macron can't be that stupid. Send in NATO troops into Ukraine. That's World War III. Look, I don't have a lot of, confidence in the intelligence of a lot of these world leaders, but that, I'm telling you, I think a 6-year-old would figure that one out. You don't do that sort of stuff. And you had Poland coming out and agreeing with it. I can tell you that because I do speak to people from Ukraine who are very anti-Zelensky. They feel that he's a puppet, that he has just done whatever the West has told him to do. It came out in the press over there that they had a peace deal, and Boris Johnson hopped on the plane and said no. And over 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers are now dead since then. And they're on the verge of complete collapse. You have almost 8 million Ukrainians have fled the country. And I can tell you honestly that if Zelensky's assassinated, it would be one of these Ukrainians to do it. Because they feel that he has betrayed their country, their people, and he only takes orders from overseas. And he even came out, I think, about 2 weeks ago and said, no. If we want peace, I can make that decision. So he wouldn't have even said that if the opposition within the government is not rising very dramatically. They can't win. Everybody that I know, and I mean absolutely everybody, Russia had 4.5 million people in the military. And honestly, what did you ever expect that you could actually take Ukraine and defeat Russia? Nuts. All right. Putin has done only what he said he would do, and go in and defend the Donbass. Now, I can tell you from inside Russia, the hardliners have criticized him dramatically for that. They feel that he should have went in, taken out Ukraine, and this war would have been over in 6 weeks. They should have went in the same way we went into Iraq. But he didn't want to he didn't want to conquer Ukraine. He basically just wanted protecting the Donbass. That was it. And so internally in Russia, you have the old, USSR people that are against Putin because they know this is a war of NATO, US against Russia. And nobody gives, honestly, a second thought to having Ukrainians die. They don't care.
You know what scares me, Martin? That is that we have given the US 14 military bases in Norway these days.
Yeah. Why? Why do they need them? It's honestly, look, you don't need NATO. When in that book I published, The Plot to Seize Russia, I put it right in the front page. All right. Because I got a hold of all the declassified documents from the Clinton administration. And here was the declassified document to Russia. Yes, join NATO. That was the coup against Gorbachev. The hardliners felt that would be a surrender because he was going to do it. So they surrounded his dacha when he was on vacation. And that's when Yeltsin had to stand on the tank and tell the troops, don't shoot the Russian people. When they didn't, the coup fell. But that's what that was all about. So, I mean, that, those hardliners just feel that Russia was a major world power, and that ever since, the revolution of 91, they've been going downhill. And
what can we do, Martin? What's it possible to do?
Unfortunately, we all have our neocons. China has theirs, we have ours, Europe has theirs, and so does Russia. So it's never just one, happy family. But look, this is basically what's going on, and that's why I was thankful that Putin won, because he's at least a moderate. You get one of these other guys on there, I'm telling you, you don't know what you're asking for. But with this last Moscow event, there was a statement from the Kremlin, and Putin is being forced to admit. He said, we are at war. First time he has said that. And he's vowed to see who was behind it. So this is not good. But it was deliberately done. As I said, they keep this nonsense of regime change. And they really think that if they went in, they would remove Putin. Oh, the Russian people will cheer and give us a ticker tape parade. I'm sorry. They're going to shoot your ass.
What I find so very fascinating, Martin, is that each time we talk to you is a trip down the history books. And at the same time, I'm thinking about the censorship. Because the censorship is going pretty hard in Norway at this moment as well.
Yes.
If you're opposite NATO, they put you in jail. So they're trying to put it into law, at least in this sense. So how is it for you, at least, to talk about a subject that a lot of countries, for example, this country, don't talk about? You're talking freely, but a lot have changed the last few years.
Look, if they take me out, I'm ready to beam up. It's just that, I mean, here it's still, I can say what I want, and I think honestly a lot of them want to listen because they want to see if we changed our mind. But it's what I mean about NATO is that, I mean, I have the documents, and you can get them now. Under the Freedom of Information Act, they had to release them. And they had invited Russia to join NATO. Now, the problem with NATO and why Trump wanted to, basically get out is because they always need war. If Russia is not an enemy, why do you need NATO?
Is it that simple?
It is that simple. And that's why all of a sudden they're over there opening up offices in Asia. They're a war machine. Okay? They're not there for peace. And if there is no enemy, they lose their funding. Look, I've seen stuff. They were concerned about how does NATO remain relevant. If there's peace, they're not relevant. Their funding gets taken away and it goes off to climate change.
It's so scary to put it that way. And I just hope it's not true.
Unfortunately, it's true, but every government agency does the same thing.
Right.
They all act out of their own self-interest. This is not something unique to NATO. In the United States, back in '85, I testified they should have merged the SEC and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And I warned them, you're going to, send everybody offshore, which created the hedge fund. Why? Because if you obeyed the laws with the SEC, you went to jail with the CFTC. The rules from these two agencies were counterproductive. All right. SEC, you can't earn more than, the 5%. CFTC, you can earn whatever you want as long as it's disclosed. All right. So I turned down an offer to manage $60 billion in equities. Why? Because if I thought the market was going to go down, I could not hedge. By law, the maximum I could hedge was 17%. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to get involved. All right. But that's why the hedge fund industry grew, because you had to go offshore to be able to do everything. Bonds, stocks, commodity, whatever. That's where it came from. And it came from because of overregulation. Now, why would they not merge them? I can tell you, because I was told face to face, if we did that, you would have to eliminate thousands and thousands of jobs. You merge the two, you don't need as many people. That's what it's all about.
Any questions?
You're never going to defund NATO. Sorry. And they're always going to say, oh, Russia's going to take invade Europe any day now. That was under Khrushchev, yes. I don't think Russia wants to do that today. The Russian people would not support that. Things have changed. Under Khrushchev, spreading Marxism and communism was almost an economic religion.
Right.
We're going to show you that the worker is and that all failed. And so you have the neocons saying, well, we're going to take democracy to the world. We don't even have democracy. Are we allowed to vote on, should there be war? Should my taxes be raised? We live in republics, not a democracy.
Yeah.
Athens had a democracy. Rome had a republic. We followed Rome.
Exactly.
All right.
So true.
They're just representatives, and they don't represent us anymore.
Any questions still?
No. I think we've covered most. I would say it's always such a pleasure to have you on, Marty. It as Frank said, we go down into history lane and we talk about the financial system, the economics. It's just potential futures, positives and negatives. It's always a blast to have you on.
Well, I've just actually been behind the curtain. I don't know. I mean, we joke about it sometimes. Maybe it's better if I hadn't been. I could just walk around in La La Land and think everything was fine. I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, I've known presidents and heads of state and what. So I've just seen it all. And I can tell you why. Because back in 1985, we were going to open our office in Geneva. And I knew there was a lot of anti-Americanism in Europe at the time. So I had a list of European names, like European advisors or whatever. And I went to lunch with the head of one of the top 3 banks there in Switzerland. And we were friends, so I said, gee, what name would you suggest? And he said to me, name one European analyst. And I couldn't at the time. I was embarrassed. I thought, oh, I'm sure there is. I just don't know of any. And he laughed. He says, there are none. He says, you don't realize why everybody uses you. And I said, no. And he explained, after World War II, the politicians used the currency in Europe. Oh, Deutschmark's up against 20% against the dollar. That proves I did a good job. So no analyst, any bank or whatever, would ever dare come out and say the Deutschmark's going to go down because it was a political statement. And he says, everybody uses you because you don't care if the dollar goes up or down. I said, it's just a trade. And with the euro right now, there's no major analyst at any of the banks that would ever come out and say the euro is going to crash by 40% or whatever. The ECB will be on the phone, fire that guy. There was an economist in Estonia that came out and said after 2007, we're going to go into a recession and everything. They put him in jail for 6 months. So, you have to understand, in America, they never used currency. So it was not a political issue. A politician couldn't say, vote for me because the Deutschmark's up against, or the dollar's up against the Mexican pound or Mexican peso. Everybody would have laughed at him. All right. So currency was just a trade here. So that's how we ended up with all these governments and stuff. Why? Because currency was important to them. It was the currency markets and forecasting all these things from a currency perspective. I got called in for the 85 when they're forming the G5. Why? Because they're going to manipulate the currency. All right. That's why I get called into all these things. You can read the end of the 1987 Brady Commission report on the stock market crash. My biggest accomplishment was to prevent them from going after the market. At the end, it says, well, we think currency had something to do with it. All right. They're not going to come out and say, look, the G5 caused this. That's the closest I could get. All right. So that's the way government is. They will never blame themselves, ever, ever. That's why I say there's no mirrors in Brussels or Washington or wherever you want to go. But it was the currency. That's how we ended up where we were.
Right.
It was always the currency because currency did impact trade, all these various different aspects. And that's why I would be getting called into all these different governments. It was currency. Not stock markets or gold.
Let's hope that things is going to get better soon, Martin.
Fingers crossed.
The main reason I do a lot of what I do is like, hopefully, maybe somebody will blink. I'd like to be wrong.
Future will.
That's all I can do is say, listen, this is where we're going. Please make me wrong, not right.
If it's getting too bad, Martin, I come in with a sailboat near your port. Wish you a great day, Martin, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Excellent.
Thanks a lot. Take care over there.
Likewise.
Bye-bye, Martin.
Goodbye.
Take care.